Hey, it's RC Gray from Survivor School. Did you know that trauma is not just a mental health problem? It's a whole life problem. It doesn't just impact your mind, it takes a toll on your body, your finances, your relationships, and your ability to grow. Survivor School provides you with the trauma informed tools to help you regain control of your whole life and take control of your future today. Because healing is a journey of 1,000 destinations. Join Survivor School. We'll lead the way.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. I'm glad you're here, and I hope that you'll gain some new understanding and insights to what it means to be trauma-informed and how sharing our sexual assault and rape experiences are an important part of the healing process. This is episode 127, which is part 3 of a 4-part series of my interview with Kaitlin Hurley-Fields and her father, Derrick Hurley. Derrick is the author of Antiguan Justice, A Father's Fight, which is the true crime story about his daughter's rape and their family's struggle in getting justice for Kaitlin. I'll pick up this week right where we left off with last week's part 2. Here's Kaitlin and Derrick.
I am actually going to back us up just a smidge, just because there's a lot more that goes into it than just walking into the courtroom. For me, the only courtroom experience I've ever had is just watching television, which is for the most part made up or dramatized or whatever. It goes so much more beyond just telling your story. There's a lot that goes into it. So my dad, my mom, and our friend who's the advocate, Annie Clark, the night before the trial, we all kind of had to sit down and discuss different little things that I personally wasn't thinking about. Like, okay, are we going to stay consistent in how my hair and makeup is every day? Are we going to wear certain colors? Like, there's some psychology behind all of that stuff that we thought about. My mom in particular was pointing out specific ways to look. My dad and Annie were talking about you need to answer things very direct. I have a tendency to be one of those that you ask me a question, I can give you a 20-minute answer. That's just how I roll typically. There was a lot more to think about than just going in and telling my story. I had to be very precise in how I moved. So we had a whole meeting and we kind of, I don't want to say practice, but we kind of went over certain things that we thought were going to come up. And I had to focus really on how to answer it in a direct manner. So the day that we go in for the trial, we actually are sitting on our side, kind of waiting for things to begin. And there's a lot of nerves that come in actually going and sitting in the courtroom. I'm like, oh, so this is actually real now. So we sit there for a bit, just the anticipation of going in there and me sitting at the box is terrifying. We have our discussion. There's kind of a bit of I want to call it like an introduction before I'm able to actually go into the room. And I'm separated from my family, so they get to go and sit down and whatnot. Walking in, I did have the decision up front. They asked me if I wanted the guy that did this to me to be in the room or not. And I said, oh, absolutely. I want him to sit through all this. I want him to be able to look at me and to hear what he did to me and be a part of all of it. So absolutely, you better put him in there. So walking in, knowing he's going to be right there was a different kind of nerve-wracking.
You hadn't seen him in how many years?
4.
Yeah, that would be quite the impact right there.
Yeah, it was a lot. I don't even think I can put into words exactly how I was feeling other than the highest form of anxiety, probably. So going to sit in the box, I am facing my jurors, and the judge kind of tells me this is how you need to be talking directly to them, make eye contact with them. You don't need to be looking at him. You don't need to be looking at your family or anybody else sitting over there. You need to address them. Up front, I was told that there were more women out there than men, and in my mind, I was, oh great, that means empathy. They're going to be thinking like, oh yeah, like, we're with you. And I was told that's actually a bad thing because they're going to be thinking of what they could have done differently. So I had all sorts of different things going through my head, looking at all of them. I'm trying to make sure I make eye contact with every individual there. I'm almost trying to feel them out in a way. Going into things, it's not even the traditional way where you would see somebody typing what's going on the laptop. I had to speak a few words at a time so they could write everything down. Yeah.
Wow.
This was a several day experience just because of that, I would say. Initially, I got to tell my story very slowly to all of them. Eventually, the defense attorney got to question me on a lot of it. And that part, I would say, was the most painful part of the whole experience for a variety of reasons. Well, for one, I'm being questioned, and it's just a wild thing in the first place to have something terrible happen to you and then have to see the person that did that to you while convincing 12 strangers that it actually happened to you and to be able to get punishment for that person. Like, it is just crazy. That part in itself was hard. Talking to the defense attorney, he just asked some really inappropriate things too. Like, in the process, he asked me if I was Amish at one point in time. Like, it just seemed really unprofessional. And how do you think I flew on a plane, have a cell phone, like any of that kind of stuff if I'm Amish? Like, there was just things that I'm like, really? Like, I don't know. It just was very odd. But I have never wanted to punch somebody in the face so hard as talking to that defense attorney, because he would go back and forth with me. There were even things, for example, when we were watching a movie or we were getting a movie pulled up, he would argue with me that I chose the movie. And I'm like, is this even a significant part of the story? Does that even really matter? I didn't choose it, but then he'd be like, well, I put that on you. I'm like, what does that even mean? You don't have anywhere you're going with this? He argued with me for like 20 minutes over like insignificant pieces of details because he had nothing to go off of. I feel that it was pretty obvious he was guilty. The jurors all had all my messages, all my text messages. They were print out. They were enlarged and given to them so they could follow along with everything. They were able to see where I up front, before even meeting with him, said that I was not interested in having sex. I'm not that type of person. Don't come with an expectation of that. Everything was laid out in front of him. Several days of this was quite painful. Other than the introduction, I was not allowed in the room for, I believe it was the reading of the text messages. Is that right?
There was a section where the forensic police, when they took your phone and got the messages, whatever her testimony was, I think it was a her, because we all had to leave for that part. It was because that was before Kaitlin testified, and they didn't want anything that came up prior that she could use in her testimony. Kaitlin's so spot on, and she did an unbelievably good job. All that time for the defense attorney was victim blaming. It was just victim blaming.
Yeah.
Drinking, what do you wear? All the normal stuff. Well, that was, and it was ridiculous.
Textbook victim blaming.
Yeah. Several days of feeling probably some of the lowest lows of my life. It's mind baffling to me to have somebody defend somebody that's done something so bad where it's so obvious too. So I'm not only mad at him, now I'm mad at like the defense attorney. Like, they're both kind of like grouped together. After several days of giving my side of things and being questioned relentlessly and whatnot, I could step out of the box, which was great. And the medical examiner went up there and went over everything, which just from the audience side of things at that point, I'm able to kind of read the jurors, and you could tell that made a pretty big impact, being able to hear the medical examination. When it came to time for him to make a decision on what he was going to do, it was the option of, for one, you could say nothing. For two, you could go up in the box and swear in and give your side of things, or you could stay in your little area that you're sitting in, which is kind of like a wide open box in the middle of the room. You could stay in there and you could not swear in, and you could just tell your story. But if you're going to tell your story in that box, you are not going to get any questions, and you're not swearing in, so it's already a little bit questionable. So he chose to do that, the third option. I got to listen to how his version of everything was, which was wild, by the way, and I think incriminating in itself, because he told things so differently. He had the best time. You know, I don't even know that he paid attention when I was talking, because he said things like, I got drilled on that movie, like, who chose the movie? And he's like, okay, and I chose the movie. And I'm just like, okay, you obviously weren't even paying attention. You're not even trying to, back and forth with me or anything. He just laid it out there. But his version versus the medical examination, if those two were the only things in this whole experience, that probably would have been enough, I would say. They were so opposite of each other. So he got to make his statement and whatnot. I'm going to let you talk about what the prosecution heard.
Closing?
Yeah.
Let me just say a couple things on that. Kaitlin covered it pretty well. There's a few things different in the UK law. They used to be colonized by the UK, and they still follow their laws and have a tight relationship. The option for the defendant to speak without being under oath or being cross-examined, that's something they do in the UK. I was furious at first that was an option, but then I realized the prosecutor can use what he says in the closing statement. You know, his story and Kaitlin's story were pretty much in lockstep until they got back to her apartment. And that's when the stories took completely different paths. And he kind of hung himself because the words he used was basically talking about it being fun fun and all that. But then the medical examiner's report proved completely opposite. He did his spiel, but he did not address anything that was controversial or contradictory that he had put. He just tried to tell a story and make it seem like, hey, this was just a fun night, whatever. The layout of the court's different. There's just things different from what you see on TV because it's UK law they're following. It started off, as Kaitlin talked about the stress level, everybody was stressed. No more than her, she had to get on the stand and deal with just ridiculousness. We kind of expected it, but we were all furious. There were times on a break where the defense attorney and the defendant and the whole little group were there, and they're just laughing and almost cutting up on a break right in front of us. I actually told Corporal Forbes at one point, he came down to check on us. I said, we're about to have a problem because it was really bothering us. And he kind of calmed the situation down a little bit. What happened after the medical examiner went, it's almost flipped the script. It literally flipped the script. I think they felt like they were doing good, and then it went downhill. And all of a sudden, we're feeling pretty good because now the real evidence is out there, and the demeanor and the how people are acting changed a lot. And we were all trying to observe everybody we could, including the jury, who was pretty stone-faced for the most part. When we got to the closing, I will just say that the prosecutor was incredible. She put the story together so good, and she started basically by saying it's like a spider creating this web and drawing in their prey. And then she went through this. It's something you would literally see out of a motion picture. It was that good of a closing. And I thought, that doesn't do it. I don't know what's going to do it because it was that good. And frankly, the defense, they didn't really have a defense. When all you can do is victim blame, you have no defense. And that's just the reality what it is. And that's how it went. And so it was masterful. And I think I'm understating it.
Yeah, she was awesome. I think just out of the movie is for real what it felt like to me as well. It was wild. So I had to sit back with my family for whenever he was doing his non-sworn in statement and everything. And for that, I just want to mention whenever he was giving his thing, I'm obviously full of emotions. I have angry, I'm not a big crier. I had angry tears, just shaking, being like, that's such a liar and everything the whole time, like just furious. The judge, I don't recall what exactly it was for, but he had to leave to go get a copy he had to get something. So he left for just like a brief moment. During that moment, I am, what do we say, maybe not even 10 yards away from...
I'd say 15 feet.
Yeah, 15 feet from the defense group, laughing, fist bumping, high five, whatever. I think all of us were just fuming. I felt myself inching closer and closer towards my seat. I felt almost overcome with something. You don't ever really think about murder, but that was the moment I was thinking about murder. And Annie behind me, I think she could read the back of my head or something. She's like, don't do it. Don't do it. She's like, don't you do it, Kaitlin. Do not get out of that seat. Like, just telling me over and over. And it's probably a good thing because I was really thinking, man, I am so close right now. I could just, But yeah, that just, it is wild. It's so inappropriate too. I wanted to just, I don't even know what the solution would have been other than just be like, are you freaking kidding me right now? Somebody clean this up because this is just so wildly unprofessional.
Right.
And honestly, it was very offensive to me. You're not even taking this like it's something that actually happened to me. It's ridiculous.
Can I ask a couple of quick questions?
Sure.
The way the system works, which I'm totally unfamiliar with, I'm going to be transparent. I know American criminal courtrooms, but I don't know UK or Antiguan criminal courtrooms. Was the defense attorney from the UK or was he Antiguan?
He was Antiguan.
And
but most of them got their law degrees mostly from the UK.
Okay. And that process of him being able to tell his side of things from that box without being sworn in, and you said that then the consequence of that is that nobody can ask him questions. So that apparently means both the prosecutor and the defense attorney, they can't ask him anything about that?
He just tells his story. Everybody knows it's not under oath and he can't be questioned. I mean, the jury's well aware also. And you can read into it everybody reads something different into that. In the beginning, I don't think any of us liked it. But in the end, we realized that it helped us, actually. He slit his own throat because not trying to address the questionable things just shows you're guilty because you can't defend some of the things.
And let me go back then to your testimony. Kaitlin, were you examined by the prosecutor asking you questions to lead you along that path, or was yours just a block of information also?
I gave my story, just myself initially. The prosecution did ask me some questions, obviously very different experience though than with the defense. And prosecution, the time it was pretty brief. They didn't have very many things. If anything, it was just to clarify some details. The defense though, I mean, it did take days. It took days just talking to them. It was miserable.
They had 2 days on the stand.
2 days of just a redirect from the defense attorney asking ridiculous questions, from what I'm gathering.
That sums it up.
Yeah, it was brutal, and it was 2 days, but it's kind of like the same time, like if you're working a code, like if somebody's actively dying, you work on them for 5 minutes, it feels like you did it for 2 hours. It was those kind of 2 days. It was brutal, and trying to process that stuff. I mean, I lost weight just that time we were in Antigua. I couldn't hardly eat. I was having inability to eat whatsoever. It was really hard. My body was going through it. My mind was going through it. My emotions were going through it. It
was the defense attorney at all respectful? I know he was asking victim blaming type questions, but in terms of attitude and demeanor, was he professional and respectful, or was it more of a sarcasm attitude of, were it not for you making this all up, we wouldn't be here kind of thing?
To be politically correct, he was a piece of crap. He did not care about how I felt. It felt like he was there to demean me and to make sure that I felt bad. I don't know if that was a tactic to try to make me fess up to something or start believing something that didn't happen, or I'm not really sure. But yeah, he was just, he just is a disgusting human being to me.
If I can just say, my view of him was overly aggressive in a mean way. And when Kaitlin said that about the honesty, of course, Caitlin's story is why she was there, her faith and all these things. And when it came down to that movie, he spent 10 minutes trying to get Kaitlin to agree that she picked the movie. And what was, I don't know, American Pie, which she'd never seen. And she said it. That's when she said she didn't even know the movie, because just when it came out and the timing, she'd never seen it. And that's when he said, "What are you, Amish?" I will say the judge scolded him, as he should have, because it was building to that.
Yeah, it was very much deserved. He was just awful. Like, the only time I can really remember breaking down amid all of that, I feel like I answered everything pretty straightforward. The only time I really broke down was during that point in time where he was being so hard with me. And I was just, why did God let this happen to me? And I just burst into tears. And then they had to kind of pause everything, reset. And it's really hard once you're at that point to keep moving forward with it too, because you just want to be like, you know what, I'm done with this. This wasn't worth it. I'm getting even more traumatized from this whole experience. At that point, you don't want to either. It's so hard. You have this internal conflict of, okay, protect yourself, get out of here. And well, no, you need to do this to protect kind of everybody and not let this thing happen again. It's brutal.
It sounds brutal. Kaitlin, it sounds surreal in terms of almost torturous. And I just want to offer my sincere empathy and condolences. I'm sorry you had to endure that. But I'm going to follow that up with, I am so glad you did. I think that is so powerful and so amazing that you found that inner strength to persevere and push through all of that anger and frustration. And like I said, just the whole surreal atmosphere of that situation, never having known anything at all about what that was going to be like and walking into a nightmare. I'm just so sorry.
I appreciate that. At that point, I think I felt like this is like, I have to do this.
Yeah.
Like, it was not really a choice. It was like, I have to. Once we got to that point of, okay, we're going to read, how things go, the jurors were able to ask me questions at one point.
Actually bring that up. Another thing in the UK law that's a little different that we didn't know either. Let's say Kaitlin, if she's at the end of her testimony, and this is true for every person that got on the stand, once the defense is done, or depending on which order, the jury has the option to ask questions. And how that works is they write them down. They all go to the judge. He reviews them first to make sure they're appropriate. He reads them to the person on the stand. I actually like that, because who you want to get what they need out of it is the jury. And if they're left with questions, it's a way to deal with it. I actually thought it was good, and they did do that with Kaitlin.
I like that too.
Yeah, it sounds almost like an opportunity to get a read on what the jury is thinking and feeling and how they're interpreting things. Then do you have the opportunity, after answering those questions, to also be re-questioned by the prosecuting attorney? or the defense attorney? Either one? Did they have the opportunity to redirect?
I don't think we did.
I don't think so. I don't recall that happening with any of the, because they asked questions on several people that testified. I don't recall that.
So it's just answer the questions and that's that. You have that one shot to clarify anything at that point.
Yes, and even though I think it was beneficial, I got asked a couple of different questions. The only question I remember specifically from that is that with the story of everything, he had at one point told me that he had put vodka in my wine. It was the thing that they did in the UK. Well, I'm not from the UK. I don't know what they do over there. I was asked specifically by one of the jurors what kind of bottle the vodka was in, plastic or glass. I was like, yeah, I know. It's so,
That's what we did.
That's the thing. So the other questions I think were on par with everything. To me, they made sense. That was the one where I was, are we all on the same page here? Like, I thought it was such an insignificant question, but I think they were trying to see if I was lying because I had vodka in the freezer. So I think they were trying to see if I was lying about something minor. I'm not really sure. That's the only question I really remember from that.
Then you start worrying a little bit about the jury, to be honest,
Yes.
because what in the world kind of question is that? Maybe there's something behind it we couldn't figure out, but we talked about it a lot after.
It made me nervous
weird.
because I'm like, if we're asking stuff like that, what did we get out of everything I've just been through?
Did the prosecutor ever address that to you afterwards as to what that question may have been in reference to?
Nope.
No. And it's really irrelevant because he never put vodka in a drink.
Right.
Just use that because it's going to taste different, and that's something he threw out there. So
It's odd.
I will just say this to wrap Kaitlin's part of it up. She got off the stand on the Friday. Those questions from the jury got us spooked a little bit because while some of them were fine, a couple of them, while the questions were fine, if you would have been paying attention, one in particular was about, did they drink any of that wine there on the balcony and something? It was already covered twice through testimony. And the fact that they ask again, I'm like, are they not paying attention?
Right.
So you worry about everything. I mean, we're all sweating it the whole time.
Yeah.
And so now it's Friday, we have the weekend off. I'm thinking we need to do something fun because we need to get our minds off of this because morning till bed, it just didn't stop. I mean, it's just what it was. After the trial, we're talking about it all evening, and Kaitlin and I had both done this excursion. She had actually done it a lot. As her favorite one is the
Wadadley Cat's circumnavigation. So you're on a catamaran boat. You do a trip around the island, and you make stops to go snorkeling, to go eat some local food. I did it, I think, 6 or 7 times while I was there. I loved it.
Wow.
It is fun. Yeah. And so we booked that because Kaitlin and I are the only ones that had done it before, and we thought it would be good. And I think all the young ladies liked it. I will say Jill and I were just so worried about the juror stuff. It just kind of wrecked that a little bit for us because we were just thinking, what's going on? If you're not paying attention, what's that going to do? And this is, remember I said the things flipped when medical examiner came up. That was the next week after the weekend. Boy, if we could have got in there on Friday, we would have had a good weekend, I think. But it was before that. So it made it a long, tough weekend.
No, I think I can relate to that feeling that you had in terms of, were they listening? Why would they ask that if they had been listening? You know, when I do presentations and then I get done with a section or get to the lunchtime or the end of the day and I ask, okay, we're wrapping up. Any questions? And they ask stuff that I went over for maybe 20, 30, 40 minutes, and they ask something as plain as day has already been gone over. It's like, wow, how in the world did you not hear when I talked about that? So yeah, I can well imagine that would put a very questionable pit in your stomach for the weekend. Did you feel the same way too, Kaitlin? Or
I did. I don't think I was maybe as hooked on specifically the jurors thing. I was worried about, are they going to forget about something I said? Are they going to remember it the same way when they come back after the weekend? Are they going to have time to have thought about something differently?
Yeah.
I think I was worried more about that. It was a long experience for me, but they don't have, I think that there were a couple people who took notes. There was a woman that was on the far left in the front. I specifically remember she was on it. She had a notepad. She wrote down details. She was like, she was one of those, I'm like, don't forget a thing. She came prepared. But everybody else, I mean, there were some people I felt that they had that emotional connection to me. There were a few women who were very expressive. And I'm like, okay, you're with me here. But man, there were some people, especially like on the back row, for whatever reason, I'm like, man, I cannot read them at all. They got nothing going on with their face.
Like a statue.
Yeah, they were just I could not tell what was going on. And it made me nervous for them to have time. I'm like, I already don't know now. I'm really not going to know. So.
Yeah. Well, two days is a long time to digest stuff or undigest or forget. So I can well imagine what you were thinking. And are we talking 12 jurors there as we do here in the U.S.?
Yeah. It was 12 jurors.
Okay.
I will say one thing on that, though, and we didn't know this till near the end. If they don't come back unanimous after 3 or 4 hours, the judge will check on them. They'll actually take a 10-2 verdict. There is some, I'll just say, wiggle room there. Ideal to be a unanimous, but it doesn't have to be. I didn't know that till we were near the end. It actually made me feel better, but it didn't matter in our case, but it's different.
Whenever the time came for the jury to kind of step aside and talk and make their decision, we were put in a room, just me and my family and Annie, and that felt torturous in a different way because we couldn't talk to anybody. We couldn't be on technology. We were just amped up. And me and Dad in particular, we can't stay in here. We need to go walk around. We got too much anxiety, too much energy. So we kind of just like walked around a little bit. And we had Corporal Forbes. He came and checked on us and whatnot. That's when we, I think, found out about them too. But he also told us, he was like, oh yeah, they'll have that decided before lunch. And we were like, what? Because, stuff can be really drawn out here.
Yeah.
So we were like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, they're not going to feed them lunch here. They're going to make a decision. So that made us feel, we were shocked, happily surprised with that. There was somebody else who came over there and was on our team, I guess you could say.
Well, while we were standing there, Riley Adams came by, who was the first chair, I guess, and actually told Kaitlin, this is before we knew anything, we're just killing time. She told Kaitlin, you know what, I don't know how, juries, you never know. You did great, but at least you got your day in court. I remember that very well.
That, and then the gentleman I was talking about came over, and he told us that it was actually good luck to do it on the day we were doing it, which I was, what are you talking about? And he said, well, this is the exact day 4 years ago that the crime happened. He said there was a crime that happened, a different crime, where it happened on, they went to decide if they were guilty or not on the exact same day, and it was a success, and they were guilty, and they got their justice. He's like, so this is good luck that you're having this on the exact same day years later.
We did not even realize that it was Corporal Jones-Gittin.
Yes.
It was Corporal Jones-Gittin, yeah.
So I was like, huh. Like, I don't even think that registered, completely with us.
Yeah.
We're kind of talking about that, getting that encouragement. Then we get told, okay, they've got a decision. We're like, oh my gosh. So we have to run over and get my mom and sisters and whatnot. We're sitting front row on our side, and
before you say that, I just have to say this. I've never had my adrenaline rush and heartbeat so hard and fast in my life. I'm sure you're the same. We basically ran to get the rest of the family. We almost busted in the room and told them the jury's back. And they were scrambling like mice running, with the light turned on, trying to get their stuff together. It was kind of a surreal moment, but man, I could feel my heart beating. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Yours was the same, I'm sure.
Oh gosh, if I had had an Apple Watch on at that time, it would have said go to the emergency room. You're in AFib or something. It was bad. We're sitting in the front right row where we'd kind of been the whole time. I mean, it was a matter of minutes. Felt like a lot longer, but the judge is, how do you find the defendant? And the moment that they said guilty, I can't explain it. Me and my parents felt a physical weight lifted off of us. I mean, I'm automatically crying. We're all highly, highly emotional, just overwhelmed with this sense of relief. I've never felt anything like it. I've never felt anything like it at all. I felt like my shoulders got lighter. It just was surreal. During that time, in preparation of everything, I think it was you and Mom who had said we should write an impact statement on everything. So I didn't write mine until after that first day when we kind of went over what should you wear, how should you, all that kind of stuff behind it. I wrote mine. He was told that he was guilty. We all got a chance to go up there and read our impact statements. I went first, then my mom, then you, then Taylor.
Actually, I read Emily's because she had to leave. She got real sick, and we had to get her back to the States because we didn't want her to be in the hospital there. She's fine, but she had a bad infection. But anyway, so I had to read mine, and then I read Emily's, and then Taylor went.
There was a different sense, a different feeling when I went up to go read my impact statement, because the whole time that I had been up there prior, I was shaking in my boots. This time I felt empowered to go up there, kind of be like, F you. I have it typed out. I don't have it memorized, but I can tell you exactly what my last line of the whole thing said, which was, and I looked at him as I'm reading this because I want him to know. He never once made eye contact with me. I was like, I want to look at him. I want him to know. On this day, I was wearing white. He was wearing red. I was like, this is angel devil moment. But I read, I will never truly feel a sense of peace until this excuse of a human being is no longer breathing. And that felt great to say.
Yeah. Wow. That's good stuff. So many questions rushing through my head. I do have one question that comes to mind in terms of something you said earlier. When that verdict was read, did either of you happen to see the look on his face? Do you know what his reaction was?
I can tell you, no reaction. That was bizarre. No reaction. I'm thinking, here you're facing pretty significant jail time here. No reaction.
Yeah. Nothing. Like, even when we were reading our impact statements, nothing. I read mine. I thought he would glare at me, like roll his, like just at least something to go off of, to be like, oh, I'm pissed, like I'm upset. There was zero reaction. Every single impact statement that was read, no eye contact, no reaction whatsoever. And the impact statements, I mean, mine was impactful, but hearing everybody got impacted in some different way, and just, he gave nothing the whole time. Absolutely nothing.
And I've always been told in my years of courtroom and talking to court psychologists and prosecutors and even defense attorneys that if the defendant has that reaction on the not only the evidence that's produced, but especially once the verdict is read and it's guilty and there's no response, is that they knew was coming. There's no surprise to them. So why would they react? It's just what they expected.
Hey, it's RC Gray from Survivor School. Did you know that trauma is not just a mental health problem? It's a whole life problem. It doesn't just impact your mind. It takes a toll on your body, your finances, your relationships, and your ability to grow. Survivor School provides you with the trauma-informed tools to help you regain control of your whole life and take control of your future today. Because healing is a journey of 1,000 destinations. Join Survivor School. We'll lead the way.
Yeah, that's in line with him also not wanting his mom and girlfriend to be there. I mean, it's like, didn't want that extra embarrassment or shame or something to go along with it. So that makes sense.
If I just to kind of finish off that day, and I will say we all broke down when the verdict was read. And as we were walking to that and got in our positions, and Jill, my wife, was just saying, I hope we get to it quick. I hope that we get to it quick. But when they said guilty, we all were crying. But Jill was just standing there for a minute. And I said, what's going on? And she didn't think she heard it right. You got to remember, she really thought we would never get here because all the statistics, everything was against us.
Yeah.
So it was pretty good. Nothing really, Kaitlin covered it well because there's just feeling was indescribable. And as we left the court, Porter, I think it was a TV guy, asked about doing an interview, and basically we told him after, we had to come back that afternoon for impact statements. We took a lunch break, which was good. Gave us a little bit of time to decompress. We called a few people to tell them the verdict. Came back and we did that. And I will say, much like Kaitlin, Kaitlin did so good on the stand and she did great on her impact statement. I read mine and I mean, I speak all the time publicly, all over the world. I've done stuff. I had a hard time reading it. I think it's because I finally got to get up and tell how I felt about it. But like Kaitlin, and I tell people all the time, Kaitlin and I took a point to look at the guy, and I was talking about vengeance, honestly, at this point, because that's kind of where I wanted kind of to connect with him. He was just dead straight looking. He was not going to look at anybody on that stand. He literally was like a statue the whole time. But it was all good. We communicated. We got back. We read our impact statements. I'm going to just tell you one quick side point. The Monday, it ended on a Thursday. So I think it was the Tuesday morning, my back started hurting pretty bad. And, we're sitting on pews all the time. I've had back issues off and on. Usually I'm doing exercise stuff, but my back started hurting. Every time I stood up, it was painful. It took me a bit to walk. when we got through with that verdict and got back to the hotel that day, and we were going to not leave till Saturday. So we had one day to actually enjoy the fact that we're at a beautiful island. Before I went to bed that night, my back wasn't hurting anymore. This was just stress and how it manifested in the body. Mm-hmm. And it was out, never felt great after that. It was weird.
Yeah.
That's just how we were all pent up with anxiety and stress through the whole thing. Kaitlin did her interview. I don't know if you want to talk about the rest of that
Sure.
and coming back and anonymity and stuff.
Yeah, so I did an interview with Antigua and Barbuda news channel. I had prepared statement for the TV as well. So I talked with them prior to the trial even starting. Whenever we were kind of in that waiting period to be pulled back into the side, there was a reporter from the UK. Was he with the Sun?
He actually wrote for 2 or 3 of them. The Sun was one of them.
His name was Daniel. He was great. He actually was looking for my family and then got me directly, and I had Annie say, we'll be in touch after everything. He was fantastic. Whenever all the stuff was done directly in Antigua, I did talk with him and a couple other groups to get my story out there. Because I said pretty much early on, if we get through all this, I'm not going to stay anonymous. People need to know. People need to see a face. People need to have a name behind things. Because I want this to be something that's remembered, important, impactful. Within the UK, things blew up over there with the story. I mean, it was everywhere. Disgraced UK officer, et cetera, et cetera. I wanted the story to come out here too. And to me, I was like, if I can get on like anything as TV, good, because my face is there. Like, I just want there to be a human connection, not just a name. So I had talked to NBC and I'd talked to CNN. CNN was the easiest to work with at the time. And so whenever we had the sentencing, which was in July, there was a writer there named Manuela. She came and a photographer with her came. And so we had Skyped in to the sentencing. That was interesting because it's like, I'm not there, but I wish I was there, but I don't. There's just a lot of mixed emotions in that. And then also feeling like, because we are being watched, they want to get the full story and everything. It was a lot to process even just doing that. They go through everything. They, show us to the jurors once again. And, they talk about the length of time and they say 15 years. My initial reaction to that, I remember being like, that's bullshit. Like, I just remember being so mad about it. In retrospect, that's a lot of time for what most people do get, which is still crazy to me. I think it should be much longer for everybody. Once you go through it, you have a totally different view on it too. Yeah, I just remember being like, this is absolute BS. He deserves a lot longer. This has changed my entire life. When it comes down to it, I am very grateful that he is behind bars. I am glad that he's not out there hurting other people. I just find the whole system a little bit unfortunate when it comes to this kind of thing. I do think if this had happened in this country, it wouldn't have been 15 years. So in a weird way, I'm glad that it happened over there, not here.
Yeah.
If I could just say one thing on that, and Dave, you've been in policing a long time, you know this way better than I do, but the statute for the crime is 20 years minimum to life. And the discretion is based on the details. But now they have this thing, that's sentencing guidelines. And I just can't in my mind, and I've asked probably 10 different lawyers, and none of them can explain it where it makes any sense to me, of how you can sentence less than the statute that the law says is the minimum. I don't get that. Happens all the time here too. Apparently happens everywhere. I would have, even if it would have been the minimum, which was 20 years, would have been better than 15. He had a mandatory 11. So he will end up doing 11 years, which will take him to 2029, I think. We knew the statute, and frankly, if you went on a scale, Kaitlin had she had issues, damage, all that. So it would not have been the minimum. It would have definitely been more. It's just frustrating. Again, we all at the time were upset. It was not too far after that Stanford swimmer situation, who got about a year and did 3 months or something.
Yep.
So you put it in perspective that, the 15 years, okay, better than if he were here.
Yeah, and that case too, horrible, all the evidence in the world. When you compare the two, it's kind of crazy that I got that long compared to her case. There were so many different pieces of evidence, different circumstances, whatnot, but it's just crazy to think that people don't get more time when it's very obvious.
Yeah, it is crazy. And I wish I had an answer for you in terms of how that works. I know here in the States, every state is different in terms of how sentencing works, or even how the statute works for what crime is charged and how the sentencing of that crime, because most states categorize stuff. They put stuff that the statute may be different, but it falls into this category for sentencing. And then ultimately the judge has discretion. And obviously, as in the California case with Brock, he got 3 months when he should have, I think the prosecution was asking for 14 years. The statistics are unbelievably, wildly crazy in terms of, number one, cases even being charged. But then once it's charged and goes to court, whether or not it gets a conviction, because most of them don't, and if they do result in a conviction, the amount of jail time served is negligible. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And I chalk that all up to what I call rape culture. It's just it's our society saying, you know what, we don't want to think about this. We don't want to face it. I could go into an hour-long tirade about what I think rape culture is and what its root causes are, but you felt it. And I'm again sorry that you had to feel that at sentencing when really he should have gotten 30 years or more, in my opinion. But I do want to talk about that. Let's go back before we talk about sentencing. That night after the verdict was read, and you left the courtroom feeling, like you said, a weight lifted off your shoulders. But the ultimate impact of that kind of an emotional day is not only that sense of relief, but more so a sense of utter fatigue and just wiped out. The fallout from that kind of emotion just makes you want to, I don't want to do anything. I need to go to bed. And I'm wondering if you have any recall memory of how that felt that evening and how your night went.
I definitely felt kind of like in the same way as Deb mentioned, like his back wasn't hurting anymore. Like I didn't feel so uptight. I could have put a coal in my mouth and spit out a diamond. I was that like tense with everything. I did not feel that same kind of tension. I felt like my body was just sore, probably from holding all that stress in for that whole period of time. I was relieved because I could finally eat something and not get nauseous or, have any kind of GI upset or anything like that, which was a big deal because, going on no food, hardly no sleep, it was a big deal to eat. I remember sleeping better that night, but I can say that your brain, even though it's over in a sense, your brain doesn't fully turn off. You're still I was still processing a lot at that point in time. Right. So I slept better, but I'm still my brain was still on.
Yeah. And then how much time elapsed between verdict and sentencing?
6 weeks.
Wow. That's a long time.
And the nice thing though is we know he's in jail. So, okay. I mean, then we'll get the sentencing, but he's in jail. And he's going to be in jail for a while. We're pretty confident, at least for a good while. It was nice that the judge said, look, I doubt you guys all want to fly down here for sentencing. You can't. And we didn't know really at the time. We hadn't gotten that far in our thinking, I don't believe. But he said, we'll let you Skype in so you don't have to make the effort. Because, it was an hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's done. You don't want to do that, right? So, which was nice that we could do it, be part of it, see it. And we joined, Annie joined, the UK policemen both joined. CNN was there, but they weren't on camera. And that's a bit of anonymity and all that. But, Kaitlin had already gotten them engaged, so it was fine. I will just say from my recollection, we got back to the hotel. Kaitlin and I both got a massage, which I'm sure helped get the stress out a little bit. Yeah. That was great.
It's a great idea.
And it was, you're right, though. You get the physical exhaustion because you have those big adrenaline rushes, and then you get the adrenaline dump. You're kind of wore out. But it was still pretty jovial that night compared to any other night because, man, the relief was just enormous. And we had one day before we left, and it was the Friday. So it's and we were actually staying at a place on the beach, but nobody had been in the water or anything. It was convenient, affordable place we could stay there that was in a safe area and near the courthouse. The UK police officers were staying there as well. And they were staying the same amount of time we were because they told us to plan through that Friday. We got done Thursday. So we had a fun day the next day. We all felt better. And the UK guys came out. I mean, we're friends with those guys. I still stay in touch with them, but we rented jet skis for all of us. We rode a bit, or part of us. We didn't have enough for all of us at the time, but a few of us went out, and I saw the UK guys. I said, why don't y'all get on the jet skis? They'd never done it. they got out there with some, I can't remember who went first, who went second and all, but, they actually participated with us. It was really
It was cool.
a good way to wrap it up and wrap it up with those guys and all. It was
awesome.
Very nice. And even the UK officers came over to check on us that day and see us. And then they came back the next day before we left.
And so did Officer Forbes.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's a lot of us in this thing for 4 years. And let me just finish the whole court proceeding by saying this. After the sentencing, we hadn't really told people. Nobody in my family knew. Kaitlin told one or two friends. We had told one couple and my wife, one of her aunts. That's it. We were strongly encouraged not to talk about it, especially with extradition. They don't want any of it in the press. They don't, the UK press is brutal anyway. We just didn't want to screw it up. So we took a lot kind of situation. That's a lot to hold in for 4 years. I don't recommend it. I wouldn't do it the same way if I did it again, but I wasn't going to be the one to screw it up was my thinking going in because I already knew the battle we had. Mm-hmm. So CNN's there. It's a Wednesday when the sentencing's done. They listen, they do interviews, they take pictures. Figured it's going to take a couple of weeks because legal has to go through and review. That's what the expectation on my side was. Until they called me 2 days later on the Friday afternoon and said, "Hey, your story's going to go on our website tomorrow." And I said, like Saturday tomorrow, because I didn't really want to hear that because what that meant was we have to start telling some people. I can't have my mom or my brother finding out on CNN about this whole case.
Right.
So we got up Saturday and started calling people and did it most of the day and wrapped it up with some close friends a couple that lives here, went to dinner with them and told them. And right off, it was like, we knew something was going on with you guys, but we figured if you want us to know, you'd tell us. And we should have told them, frankly, but we didn't just because we were just afraid to tell people.
Yeah.
That was a very much a day of unburdening. And I will say this, because we hadn't told this, the first few times you tell it's really hard. It's really hard because, as Kaitlin even saying when she was talking about it, you think about it, amongst us we talk about it, but telling somebody that doesn't know the story was really difficult. So, that all happened, got out. There's an article, you can Google our names, either one of us, and put CNN, and you can see the article is quite long. I just want Kaitlin I'm going to finish this, but I want you to come back and tell them the response you got from the article. I'll just tell you this part real quick. They within a month, actually by the end of July, they had filed for an appeal. It goes to a Eastern Caribbean appeals court, 3 judges. It took almost 2 years. Well, it took almost 2 years to get the answer. And all 3 of them held the verdict. There was 8. It initially started with they had 8 issues they raised. They were 100% things about the judge. That judge was phenomenal.
Amazing.
I mean, he had done Rwanda, the Rwanda killings. He had been down there. He's an international judge. He's from Scotland. He was so, again, movie-worthy kind of person. Wow. But, he did shut the guy down a couple of times because he got, like when he said the Amish thing and all, and it was some of that, like you broke the flow of the defense. There was no flow. It was pitiful. It just was. But anyway, it took almost 2 years for that verdict. And we were still, especially my wife was a little nervous because, some technicality could screw this whole thing up. And we don't know what they go through. So I remember getting that call and then immediately we let everybody know that we won the appeals. And then the last thing I'll just say is there's this thing called the Privy Council. This is another UK thing. There's no Supreme Court. Actually, that's taking place in the Eastern Caribbean, but it's island by island. But at the time, there was nothing. The Privy Court is equivalent to our Supreme Court, where it's these people in the UK that take the case on and they make a ruling, and that's it. Win or lose, that's it, right? Type of situation. That took another 9 to 10 months. And it took that long for them to read it to say, we agree with the appellate ruling. We're not even going to consider it. It was 10 days short of 7 years before we start to finish. I just kind of wanted to close on that, but that's a long haul for you. And even though you're feeling good and he's in jail and that's all good, you always have something in the back of your mind going, is something going to go wrong? Because, you just don't know.
Wow.
Anyway, that was a long journey. And I'm going to tell this and then you tell the CNN. So when we came back, flying back from the trial, and Kaitlin says, I'm going to give up anonymity and all that. And she started the thing with the news organizations. But I had realized that, I had written down from my first call to Corporal Forbes through the trial, I'd taken just detailed notes, person, place, time, follow up. That's how I just rode through this thing for the 4 years, because I was calling, following up constantly. And it was a grind, but at the end of it, I said, this is pretty compelling. That the extradition itself was historic. It never happened. The only case today in the Eastern Caribbean from a non-Caribbean island. But the story, when you get to the real details of the story, it's kind of like a movie. Surprises coming out of nowhere, disappointment more than success for them, I would think. At least that's how I felt. It's just how it went through the whole period. And so I said, Kaitlin, what do you think about us writing a book? And I said, you can write your perspective. I don't think anybody's ever done anything like it, was my idea. And I said, you take your vantage point as the victim and what you went through, and as your advocate dealing with the police and the government, I'll do mine, what I went through that process, trying to help get justice. We were going to do it, and then when I thought, it was in December of 2019, the trial ended, since it was July, I thought, it's probably time, we're going to do it, we should probably get started while it's still kind of fresh. And she decided, she's not ready to do that, but encouraged me to go ahead, which I did, 85% of the book in 1 month, because I had notes. I knew the story. I lived it every day, but I waited until the appeals was done, until the Privy Council was done before I put it out. I didn't put it out until June 2022, called Antiguan Justice. I named it that because I felt like they earned it, because they could have not taken this. They could have just said, we're not going to do an extradition. So I'm so thankful that they did. They did the right thing, but people don't always do the right thing. We did that and springboarded from that just to do my own thing. But I want to circle back and tell you, the CNN response was pretty, I'll say this part, and I want Kaitlin to talk about her response to it. After 3 days, so actually Monday, so it went on at midnight, basically Saturday, and the lady that wrote the article called me on the Monday, and I said, well, how's it going? I don't know. Are people reading it? She said, you won't believe it. They have it in, I was trying to think of how to say it, but they have a special kind of article in it, and then they have a lot of things that flip. It stayed out there for 3 days is the main thing. She said over 1 million people have looked at this article, and it was multi-pages, and she said the large majority had read the whole thing. I said, well, how do you know? She said, we can tell which page they abandoned it on. And most of them went to the end, right?
Wow.
So,
Wow.
And then it moved on to the other section for a while until some big political story happened or something, and it washes everything off. So that was for reading it. Now, I think you should tell a little bit, because the response was pretty incredible.
So when the article came out, I didn't have the exact same approach as my dad. I didn't start calling people. I think partially because whenever everything initially happened, and I did tell a close friend back here, I got treated very differently. While I didn't have that expectation of everyone, if I was to tell them, I just didn't want to, I guess, necessarily risk that again, because it felt so odd at the time. So what I did was, I only have one form of social media, which is Instagram. I took a screenshot of the headline, and I took a screenshot of every article from the UK. I posted it, and I wrote a little thing about everything that had happened. I got over, and I'm not somebody that has a lot of followers. I had over 50 people comment on my post. I'm sorry this happened. Just a variety of different responses from my small circle of people. I had a couple of people that, when I had lived in Nashville and went to Belmont University, had called me just to be like, I saw this, I hope you're okay. We don't have to talk about, just trying to reach out, which was very nice. But the stuff I wasn't expecting, I guess quite like it happened, was the response from all the people I don't know. Lots of positive feedback overall. I wasn't expecting any kind of people to directly reach out to me. I do have a LinkedIn account, and I had several people reach out to me through that, most of which were positive. One in particular that I remember really well was a dad had reached out to me who had 2 younger daughters, who I guess were 16 and 14. And he just wrote me a really just positive message and was like, we really look up to you. I've talked to my daughters about this. You're such a great example for them. But I was like, that right there is exactly why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
It felt so good. So I got a lot of positive that. I got a couple of private messages through there that I didn't appreciate. Stuff where I'm like, you clearly just don't get it yet. Because while I think the intent was probably to be positive or encouraging, I really don't need, and I think this goes for anybody that's gone through trauma, you really don't need somebody saying, well, this was part of the plan. This was God's plan for you. This was supposed to happen. It kind of makes me want to, yeah, oh man, I kind of want to give you the middle finger when you tell me that after I've just been through something terrible.
Yeah.
I do think they did that maliciously. I think it was trying to come from a good place. It just didn't. So I got a little bit of that. Some of the most impressive stuff to me was, and also kind of me being like, wow, people can find you, is I got some letters in the mail. A couple of people had taken the time to find where I was living, but my parents' address, and had written me some letters, two of which I actually did mail back and forth with for a while. There was a woman who had gone through a very similar experience, but somewhere over in Africa. We sent letters back and forth for a period of time, and with very similar circumstances between me and her. So it was really cool to have somebody make a point of, hey, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, I've been through this. It was really, really amazing. And the other group, there was a couple that was from somewhere out west.
Like Oregon, maybe.
Somewhere out west. And they were, I believe, paramedics. They also wrote a very kind letter about, this is so huge that you've done this. It's very encouraging. And they actually even sent me like a check in the mail for continuing education, because they're like, we're so proud of you for coming out and sticking with your nursing education while you were going through all this. So I thought that was pretty incredible as well.
That's awesome.
So I've got just so much awesome feedback from a lot of people. It's, I think, just going to continue the more that I'm like vocal with this and the more that I can share the story. So I hope that this is an encouragement to anyone who's been through something like this, that they're not alone, that there are people out there that have been through the same thing. That's one of the things that I don't think I ever really thought about whenever I had gone through it, because there's a whole world of this stuff, and it doesn't really open up to you until you're directly impacted by it.
Right.
If anybody is like listening to this, I hope that they know that they're not alone, and that you get through this. Just make sure you have a good support system around you. Do what you need to do for you, because it's hard, but it does get easier.
David, can I just say one thing? When Jill and I started calling folks, and we started, of course, with our families who didn't even know, and people are always amazed. This has been going on for 4 years. We've been around you a lot. How do we not know? And you just learn to go in a different mind space. The disturbing thing, I will say, over the course of maybe 3 weeks, because, after that day, we were trying to get to the close people, and then we just expanded out a little bit. And some people, close friends, actually found out through CNN what we were trying to avoid. CNN was too quick for us, I have to say. But the disturbing part was that as we told people, and it's not like we know that many people and had that many discussions, 22 people had told us they too had been assaulted. In almost every case, they told very few people. In some cases, we were the first person they told. Some of them, they hadn't even told their spouse.
Wow.
And that's disturbing when I start thinking about how many people we probably talked to, how often that happened. And it still happens to this day, because I spend my time in this space, and it's unbelievable. And this is just right back to Kaitlin's point. This happens to a lot of people, and there's a lot of support out there. And it's important to get support, because you're going to have trauma, which maybe we'll talk about. But if you don't do something, that trauma doesn't just go away. It just will not. It'll manifest into worse things over time, physical ailments even.
Absolutely,
But anyway, I was shocked at how many people told us, and I'm thinking, these are people we interact with all the time. If you went to any event, there's going to be people in that room that have probably been assaulted, and they may not have ever told anyone. It's just statistically, it's just the probability. And we found that out kind of the hard way when it was people close to us. It was hard to get your head around.
Yeah. So much to say in response to that, but I want to go back, first of all, Kaitlin, to what you were saying, and in your announcement to those who are listening, that there is community, there is hope, there is healing. And I just want to emphasize that is the purpose and intent of this platform. It's why I started this podcast, and so I'm very grateful that you brought that up and that you said those things. And I'm also very grateful that you, Derrick, too, are now both part of the Sexual Assault Survivor Stories family. This story is going to make a huge impact.
We appreciate you having us. It's important to get the stories out. I mean, the only way to normalize it is for people to talk about it.
Yep.
And it's not always easy to talk about it. I actually left my job, and I deal with this stuff every day. I help a lot of different groups, and I speak, and I actually was back in Antigua in December doing trauma training for first responders. They invited me back to do trauma-informed training.
That's
so
amazing.
Whatever I can do to help.
There is one more thing that I think is important to mention on my end. So about a year after the article had come out with CNN, I am on LinkedIn and I get a message from a girl from England, similar age and just kind of looks like me in a way. She said, "Hey, is this the Kaitlin Hurley from the CNN article?" And this is somebody I don't know. Yes, it is. Well, she said that she's glad that I got him because it had happened to her too.
He had gotten her too.
He had gotten her too. It was validating to me because I'm like, okay, he's clearly, I already knew that he had done this before, even without having evidence of anything. I just knew it.
Yeah.
Now I definitely know it. It's one of those things where like, it was validating, but also I think she was afraid to come and tell me because she's like, oh, maybe I could have stopped this from happening to you. It was a weird thing to process. If anything, it makes it all that more important for people to come forward if they can. I know everybody's not in the right mental space and everything for all that. It takes a lot out of you, but it's so important that we get these people off the streets. I just want for everybody to be safe. I want the world to be safer.
The sad part is if he gets out of prison, there's a high likelihood that he'll continue to do what he's been doing. Once somebody starts, it's next to impossible for him to change. But I appreciate you. I think what you've done is amazing.
It's been a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really hard. Kaitlin, as with all my guests, I'm always concerned and curious as to what it is that you do to take care of yourself. And I've mentioned this throughout this interview, that talking about these types of things actually activates, or some people use the word triggers, what is called implicit memories that are in our heads that we just don't realize they're there. And I'm sure that's happened to you over the last several years since this all has transpired, that new things, new memories pop into your mind all the time. When that happens, are you able to talk to us about what you do to respond to those types of intrusive, sometimes surprising memories? What are your coping mechanisms, and what have you done to heal from all of this throughout these years? That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. But again, like last week, this captivating story isn't over. Tune in next week for part 4, the concluding episode of Kaitlin and Derrick's experience of getting justice for Kaitlin. Thank you for being a part of this podcast's audience. My hope is that you're becoming more educated and aware of what it means to be trauma-informed. It's part of my ongoing efforts to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault, and to provide a platform to help in the healing process. You can do your part too. A good way to do this is to start by believing whenever someone reaches out to you to tell you about their story of interpersonal violence, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. Also, please remember to give a rating for this show and to subscribe to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. It's another way to bring justice to victims and survivors. Be sure to tell your friends, neighbors, colleagues, and family about this amazing episode, and be sure to tune in next week for part 4, the powerful conclusion of Kaitlin and Derrick's interview. You won't want to miss it. Thank you again for being here. We'll see you next week.
Hey, it's RC Gray from Survivor School. Did you know that trauma is not just a mental health problem? It's a whole life problem. It doesn't just impact your mind. It takes a toll on your body, your finances, your relationships, and your ability to grow. Survivor School provides you with the trauma-informed tools to help you regain control of your whole life and take control of your future today. Because healing is a journey of 1,000 destinations. Join Survivor School. We'll lead the way.